Welcome back to our podcast, where we invite legendary figures from the past to talk about their lives. Today's guest is Franz Kafka, the man who turned anxiety into architecture, the man who spent his entire life standing in front of doors he never opened, writing about trials he never escaped, waiting for permissions that never came. So here's my first question. Now that you're here, was there ever actually anything on the other side worth opening the door for?
What a question to begin with. You see, the door itself was never the problem. It was the certainty that someone, somewhere, had already decided I wasn't meant to pass through it. I spent years in Prague, in my father's house, in offices filled with grey men shuffling grey papers, all of us pretending we understood the rules. But the rules were written in a language no one spoke, enforced by authorities no one could name. So, no, I never opened the door. Not because I feared what was behind it, but because I knew, deep in my bones, that even if I did, I'd find only another hallway, another door, another functionary asking for documents I didn't possess. And you modern people, with your vision boards and your manifestation nonsense, you think the door is waiting for you to be brave enough. How charming. The door doesn't care about your courage. It doesn't even know you exist.
So what you're saying is, you gave up before you even tried. That's not wisdom, Franz. That's just learned helplessness with a fancy literary costume. We live in an era that's obsessed with agency, with breaking through barriers, with refusing to accept no for an answer. And you're telling me the better move is to just stand there and stare at the door?
Learned helplessness? How delightful. You act as though your era invented the concept of trying. Let me tell you something. I worked. I wrote at night after 10-hour days at the Workers' Accident Insurance Institute. I negotiated with publishers. I engaged 3 times. I struggled with every word. But I also recognized the fundamental absurdity of the system. Your generation mistakes frantic motion for progress. You optimize, you hustle, you perform productivity like it's a religion. And for what? So you can post about your breakthrough on some digital bulletin board while the same invisible mechanisms grind you down? At least I had the honesty to name the trap. You're still pretending it's a ladder.
Fair enough. Let's go back to where this all started. Prague, turn of the century, Jewish family in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Your father Hermann ran the show, literal wholesale fancy goods merchant, figurative tyrant. Walk me through what it was like being a kid in that house. What were the rules, spoken and unspoken?
My father was a force of nature, loud, physical, successful by every metric his world valued. He'd pulled himself out of rural poverty through sheer will and business acumen. And then there was me, thin, bookish, uncertain, a walking disappointment in a good suit. The rules in our house weren't written down because they didn't need to be. They radiated from him like heat from a furnace. Be strong, be decisive, be useful. Don't waste time on nonsense like literature or philosophy. Every evening meal was a performance where I knew I'd already failed the audition. He'd tell stories of his youth, his struggles, his triumphs, and each story was really a question. Why aren't you more like this? I'd sit there, chewing slowly, trying to become invisible. My mother mediated when she could, but even she operated within his gravitational field. The psychological architecture of that household taught me everything I'd later write about. The sense that judgment was always present but never explained. That I'd already been found guilty of crimes no one would name. That authority didn't need to justify itself because authority was its own justification.
That sounds like textbook emotional abuse, Franz. Your father weaponized his own trauma, turned his success story into a cudgel to beat you with. And your response was to internalize all of it, to make yourself smaller. Why the hell didn't you fight back?
Fight back? With what weapons? I was a child, and children don't have the luxury of your modern psychological frameworks. There was no therapy, no vocabulary of trauma, no supportive community validating my feelings. And honestly, your era's solution seems equally absurd. You've swung so far in the opposite direction that you negotiate with toddlers like their union representatives. I've heard about your gentle parenting, your endless explaining, your fear of damaging their precious self-esteem. My father threw me in the Vltava River to teach me to swim. Your parents schedule swimming lessons at the aquatic center and bring emotional support snacks. Both systems produce neurotic adults, just different flavors of neurosis. At least my generation's anxiety had dignity. We suffered quietly. You people post about your inner child on the internet and call it healing.
Okay, that's actually funny. But you're dodging the question. Your father's tyranny shaped everything you wrote: the faceless judges, the incomprehensible accusations, the sense of being guilty just for existing. How much of your work was really about him?
More than I admitted during my lifetime, certainly. I even wrote him a letter, never sent of course, laying out the entire prosecution. 45 pages detailing how his strength crushed my spirit, how his expectations created an impossible standard, how his very presence made me feel like an imposter in my own skin. But here's what your generation misses when you reduce everything to personal psychology. My father wasn't some unique monster. He was a product of his time, his class, his empire. The Austro-Hungarian bureaucracy operated on the same principle: vast, impersonal systems that demanded obedience without explanation. So yes, my work was about my father, but it was also about emperors, insurance adjusters, court officials, every petty functionary who ever stamped a document without reading it. The personal is political, as you people say, though you usually mean it in reverse.
Speaking of bureaucracy, you spent most of your adult life working at the Workers' Accident Insurance Institute. You processed claims, you wrote reports, you climbed the ladder to a senior position, and you hated every second of it, right? The soul-crushing routine, the meaningless paperwork, the whole dehumanizing machine?
Actually, no. That's the modern romanticization talking. Yes, the work was tedious: processing industrial accidents, calculating compensation, navigating regulatory frameworks. But it wasn't meaningless. We were part of a system that protected workers, that forced factory owners to take responsibility for maimed laborers. I was good at my job. I received promotions. My colleagues respected me. The institute gave structure to my days: financial stability, social standing. What I hated wasn't the work itself, but the fact that it consumed the hours I needed for writing. I'd spend all day drafting bureaucratic prose, then come home exhausted and try to transform that exhaustion into literature. The real crime wasn't that the office was soul-crushing, it's that it was perfectly adequate, comfortable even. That's what made it dangerous. If it had been truly horrible, I could have justified leaving. But it was just good enough to keep me trapped.
So you're defending the system? The same system you later immortalized as a nightmare of meaningless protocols and faceless cruelty. Come on, Franz. Your entire literary legacy is about how institutions destroy human dignity. And now you're saying your insurance job was noble?
I'm saying it was both, which is precisely the point. Your modern discourse treats everything as binary: good or evil, liberating or oppressive, authentic or corrupt. But institutions are never so simple. The same bureaucracy that processed my timesheets also prevented workers from dying destitute after losing limbs to industrial machinery. The same protocols I satirized in my fiction also created predictability, fairness, a counterweight to pure capitalist exploitation. And your era? You've simply replaced one set of soul-crushing mechanisms with another. Now you have open floor plan offices and mandatory fun and performance reviews disguised as growth conversations. You've painted the cage in cheerful colors and called it liberation. At least we were honest about the misery. You people gaslight yourselves into thinking your burnout is a personal failing rather than a structural inevitability. You've optimized the alienation, made it sleek and digital, and now you can't even see it.
All right, you've got a point there. Let's talk about the writing itself. You worked all day, then came home and wrote through the night. Stories about men turning into bugs, trials with no charges, castles with no entry. This was during World War I, during the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The world was literally coming apart. Was the writing escape or was it engagement?
It was the only form of engagement available to me. I couldn't fight in the war. My work at the Institute classified me as essential personnel. I couldn't engage in politics openly. I was a Jew in an increasingly anti-Semitic empire, a Czech-speaking intellectual in a German-speaking bureaucracy. So I wrote. Late at night, when the world was finally quiet, I'd sit at my desk and translate the madness into metaphor. The metamorphosis wasn't about a man becoming an insect. It was about how power renders you inhuman by treating you as inhuman. The trial wasn't about a legal proceeding. It was about living in a society where guilt is presumed, where the machinery of judgment operates without ever revealing its logic. And yes, I wrote while empires fell and men died in trenches, and the old order collapsed into chaos. But what was I supposed to do? Write propaganda? Produce patriotic literature celebrating the glory of Emperor Franz Joseph? The world didn't need more lies. It needed someone to say, "This is absurd, this is cruel, this makes no sense and never will." That was my engagement.
But you published almost nothing during your lifetime. You kept it all private, shared it with a few friends, stuffed manuscripts in drawers. How is that engagement? That's retreat. That's creating art for an audience of one while the world burns outside your window.
And what would you have had me do? Perform my authenticity? Build my personal brand? Oh wait, you didn't have those terms yet, but you had the same impulse. The idea that art only matters if it's public, if it's seen, if it generates what you'd now call engagement metrics. I published some stories, I gave readings, but I also recognized that my work was too strange, too uncomfortable, too unmarketable for mass consumption. I wasn't Rilke writing pretty poems about roses. I was writing about a man who starves himself to death as performance art, about a machine that carves sentences into condemned prisoners' flesh. Who exactly was clamoring for that content? My honesty was in recognizing the limitations of my moment. Your dishonesty is in pretending that being seen equals being heard, that visibility equals impact. You've confused the performance of art with art itself. At least I kept the distinction clear.
Let's talk about your personal life, because this is where things get complicated. You were engaged 3 times, twice to the same woman, Felice Bauer. You wrote her hundreds of letters, elaborate declarations of need and desire, then systematically sabotaged every attempt at actually being together. What the hell was going on there?
Here we are, the biographical dirt. Yes, Felice. Poor Felice. I met her in 1912, and she represented everything I thought I wanted. Stability, normalcy, the possibility of ordinary happiness. And I was terrified of her. Or rather, I was terrified of what life with her would require. Domesticity, children, the surrender of my writing time to family obligations. So I courted her through letters, where I could control the intimacy, manage the distance. On paper, I could be the man I wanted to be, passionate, committed, capable of love. In person, I was paralyzed. We'd set wedding dates, and I'd manufacture crises. I'd declare my devotion, then write explaining why marriage was impossible. It was cruel, I know. But here's what your era doesn't understand. We didn't have your vocabulary of commitment phobia or fear of intimacy. We had duty, propriety, expectation. I couldn't simply say, I'm not ready, or I need space, like one of your dating app casualties. Marriage was an institution, not a personal choice. And I knew, absolutely knew, that I couldn't serve both literature and family. I made my choice, and Felice paid the price.
But that's bullshit, Franz. Plenty of writers have managed to write and maintain relationships. You're not the first artist to struggle with intimacy, but most people don't handle it by stringing someone along for years. You used her. You kept her in orbit as a kind of emotional insurance policy, while never intending to actually commit. That's not a product of your era. That's just cowardice.
Yes, you're right. I was a coward. I was selfish. I prioritized my internal life over her legitimate needs and desires. I'm not claiming nobility here, but let's also acknowledge that your era has simply redistributed the cruelty, not eliminated it. You people ghost each other. You keep multiple partners on rotation through apps. You perform emotional availability while maintaining elaborate exit strategies. You've weaponized therapy language to justify doing exactly what I did, just with better branding. At least I agonized over it. At least I recognized it as failure. You've gamified human connection and called it progress. So yes, I heard Felice. But don't pretend you've solved the fundamental problem of how to be both an artist and a partner. How to maintain the solitude creation requires, while also meeting another person's needs. You've just made the betrayal more efficient.
What about the other taboos? Your diaries and letters reveal someone deeply anxious about sexuality, about bodies, about physical intimacy. You visited brothels but felt guilty about it. You were fascinated by and repelled by desire. How much of that was your personal psychology versus the sexual repression of your era?
Now we're really getting into it. Yes, I was a mess about sex. Obsessed with it, terrified of it, convinced my body was somehow wrong or insufficient. Part of that was absolutely personal. My physical frailty, my father's casual masculinity that I could never match, my sense that desire itself was a kind of accusation. But part of it was structural. We lived in an era of strict social codes, where respectable women remained virgins until marriage, and desire was something men satisfied with prostitutes while pretending to be pure. The hypocrisy was staggering. Everyone was doing things no one acknowledged. The guilt was built into the system. And yes, I internalized all of it, turned it into self-loathing and creative fuel. But your era has its own pathologies. You've swung to the opposite extreme. Everything must be spoken, shared, performed. You've turned intimacy into content, desire into brand identity. You've eliminated shame, but replaced it with the obligation to be constantly sexually optimized, available, adventurous. Different cage, same captivity. At least our neuroses had the virtue of privacy.
All right, Franz, let's put you on trial. Literally. You wrote The Trial, where Joseph K. is arrested for unspecified crimes and ground down by an incomprehensible legal system. So let's flip it. I'm charging you with being an apologist for authoritarian bureaucracy, for romanticizing powerlessness, for teaching generations to accept absurdity instead of fighting it. How do you plead?
How marvelous! A trial about the trial. I plead guilty to accurately describing the world as it exists, not as you'd like it to be. You charge me with romanticizing powerlessness? I simply observed that power operates through obscurity, that the law functions precisely because it's incomprehensible to those it governs. Your modern faith in transparency is touching but naive. You think if you just make the systems visible enough, if you just demand accountability loudly enough, the absurdity will evaporate. It won't. It's metastasized. You've got algorithms determining your fate with logic you can't examine. Corporations wielding more power than nation-states with accountability to no one. Politicians speaking in coded language that means nothing while appearing to mean everything. Joseph K. at least knew he was in a trial. You people don't even realize your defendants. So yes, I describe labyrinths, but I didn't build them. And at least I had the honesty to say, this is a labyrinth and you're lost in it. You keep insisting it's a straight path if everyone just tries hard enough.
But here's the thing. Your work has been used to justify resignation, to make people accept unaccountable power as inevitable. If everything is absurd, why bother resisting? If the system can't be understood, why try to change it? You gave generations an intellectual framework for giving up.
That's a misreading so profound it's almost impressive. I never said don't resist. I said understand what you're resisting. I said recognize that the power you're fighting doesn't operate by the rules it claims to follow. I said the first step to change is admitting the absurdity, not pretending it doesn't exist. K doesn't give up. He keeps trying to navigate the court, keeps demanding answers, keeps believing there must be logic somewhere. That's not resignation. That's persistence in the face of acknowledged impossibility. And the real crime of my era, and yours, is that the system counts on you not understanding it, on you believing that failure to navigate it is personal inadequacy rather than structural design. So no, I didn't teach people to accept absurdity. I taught them to name it, which is the prerequisite for any meaningful resistance. You can't fight what you can't see. I made the invisible visible. What you do with that knowledge is your choice, not my responsibility.
Let's talk about your ending. You died at 40, tuberculosis, in a sanatorium. But before that, you gave Max Brod explicit instructions to burn all your unpublished work. Everything. The trial, the castle, most of your best stuff. He ignored you, published it all, and now you're one of the most influential writers of the 20th century. How do you feel about that betrayal?
Betrayal is the right word. Max was my closest friend, and I trusted him to honor my wishes. I wanted those manuscripts destroyed because they were unfinished, imperfect, not ready for public consumption. I'd spent my life crafting every sentence, agonizing over every word, and the idea of incomplete drafts being treated as literature was unbearable. But I also understand why he did it. He saw value I couldn't see, believed the work mattered more than my perfectionism. And he was right, in a sense. The trial became a prophecy of totalitarianism. The castle became a meditation on modernity's alienation. My private nightmares became public metaphors. So I'm caught between gratitude and rage. Grateful that the work survived, that it found readers, that it meant something beyond my small life. Enraged that my explicit wishes were violated, that my control over my own creation was stolen, that I became a symbol I never agreed to be. It's the ultimate Kafkaesque situation. I'm trapped in a system of meaning-making I didn't authorize, judged by standards I didn't accept, immortalized in ways I actively resisted. The irony is so perfect, it's almost funny.
But here's the deeper irony. You became exactly what you wrote about. You're the man standing before the door that's always been open but you never entered. You're Joseph K., accused of being Franz Kafka. You're the hunger artist, performing your own erasure while the world watches and makes it mean something you never intended. Your fear of being judged created the conditions for eternal judgment. Did you ever consider that maybe you were the system all along?
Well, that's unusually perceptive for someone with your era's reading comprehension. Yes, I suppose you're right. I built my own labyrinth, appointed myself both judge and accused, then wondered why I couldn't find the exit. The authoritarianism I feared was partly self-imposed. The incomprehensible rules were my own perfectionism. The faceless judges were my internalized critics. And now I exist as an adjective, Kafkaesque, used to describe the very anxieties I tried to articulate but couldn't escape. I've become the bureaucracy that processes its own existence. My life is the form I have to fill out and triplicate. And you, modern people, you've made it worse. You've turned my dread into aesthetic, my suffering into content. There are Kafka t-shirts, Kafka mugs, Kafka memes. You've commodified existential despair, made it cute and consumable. I wanted to be forgotten, and instead I'm a brand. The door I never opened has become a tourist attraction, and everyone wants their photo standing in front of it. It's grotesque. It's perfect. It's exactly what I should have expected.
So here we are, back at the beginning. The door that never opens. Except now we know it was never locked. You just couldn't believe you were allowed to try. And maybe that's the real lesson. Not that the system is incomprehensible, but that we're complicit in maintaining our own helplessness. We stand outside doors waiting for permission that's never coming because we've convinced ourselves that powerlessness is the same as insight.
Or perhaps the lesson is simpler. Some doors lead nowhere. Some trials have no verdict. Some systems are designed to process you into oblivion. And the bravest thing you can do is name that truth without flinching. I didn't open the door because I knew what was behind it. Another door, another hallway, another form to complete. You stand here telling me I should have been braver, more optimistic, more willing to believe in possibility. But I was brave. I looked directly at the machinery of modern existence and refused to lie about what I saw. That's not pessimism. That's clarity. And if that makes me complicit in my own imprisonment, then at least I was an honest prisoner, which is more than most people can say.